Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar. And we'll get started in just a minute. Had a little bit of a delay there with GoToWebinar was not cooperating for some reason. But let's give everybody another moment or two to log in, and then we will get underway. Thank you again for coming out tonight, and I hope you enjoy the material. Thank you again for coming. We'll get started in just a moment. Okay, well, welcome everyone to tonight's session on serious creativity using the power of lateral thinking to create an innovative mind. Tonight we'll be talking about one of Edward de Bono's books titled Serious Creativity. And if you've had some experience with this particular individual, this might be a refresher, but if not, it should be a very interesting eye-opener. My name is Michael Erwin, and I'm a professor in the Web Design and Interactive Media Department. And as we go through the material, if you post questions in the chat area, I will try to grab those. There's also a quiz in that area for you to take once you're done. And you'll also get an email with that quiz as well. This will give you your faculty development credit. And from there, we'll get underway. Now, you'll notice I didn't use the Art Institute typical template tonight because I wanted to be a little more creative. And let's hope that I am not scolded for that particular move. This particular session is going to explore the concept of lateral thinking and specifically some of the techniques that Edward de Bono, who's a great thinker for his day, has developed over the years. And if you don't know Edward de Bono, he's a leading authority on creative thinking. He's written 55 books in the field, including international bestsellers such as Six Thinking Hats and Lateral Thinking, which has been translated into 26 languages. He's also a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford and has held appointments at the University of Oxford, Cambridge, London, and Harvard. He's one of these individuals that they'll send into big companies that are struggling with some sort of a process that the typical brainstorming sessions that people use just aren't working. And he helps people be a bit more creative and a little more effective in the way that they think and the way that they approach things. And this session will help with some of those concepts. And if you, again, have questions for those just coming in, go ahead and post those in the questions area or in the chat, and I'll try to grab those as we go through the material. So according to de Bono, he's, of course, as I said, a practitioner of creativity. The term's been misunderstood to mean the free, random, undirected activity of associative thought. And in this book, he deconstructs, and if you get a chance to get this book, I would, he deconstructs the logic of creativity in order to help us develop tools and techniques for more productive creative activity. And now this doesn't necessarily mean creativity in terms of becoming a painter, but more or less approaching problems and solutions to those problems. Okay. It's thinking about changing. There we go. Sorry about that. So serious creativity, as you read the book, I think many of us, especially Art Institute faculty, many of us are very artistic and creative, serious creativity, it seems like a contradiction in many ways, because creativity is typically thought as something that is more fun and lively and can be crazy. And so lateral thinking is the type of creative thinking that can be learned, practiced, and used by everyone, which is a benefit of his techniques. Edward de Bono quoted, "At the simplest level, creativity means bringing into being something that was not there before." Some misconceptions about creativity is it's a natural talent and cannot be taught. And I kind of noted that's very convenient, isn't it? Wouldn't that be great? Because then we would all be awesome. But unfortunately, that's just not true. Creativity comes from rebels. Again, not true. It's a right brain, left brain thing. And I think we've heard that a lot as well over the years. And then it's a release, the need for craziness, which is interesting, and also scattergun success. And I'll touch on that again briefly, but the idea behind that is, if you've ever sat in a brainstorming session, the idea behind that is just throw out a bunch of ideas and let's hope that one of them sticks. It's group or individual, and it's impacted by intelligence, and it's related to creativity, and that's also just a misconception about this. There's many practitioners of creativity that believe that creativity is just brainstorming and being free to suggest crazy ideas, and it's just not consistent or reliable. You can't generate ideas and innovative ideas this way, and it would be it would be unstructured and unproductive to actually approach the process for creativity that way. And I think that's one of the pitfalls for brainstorming, is it's just not productive in some cases. And brainstorming, you might know this, is that it originated in advertising, and people, for some reason, especially in industry, have adopted it and continued to use it. And that's where we get the scattergun effect. We sit in a room and everybody throws out some idea, and there's no structure to it. There might be a theme of some kind, and it doesn't really lead anywhere. You might stumble on some interesting idea, and frankly, people in advertising have discovered some wonderful ideas for approaching advertisements with brainstorming. And if you don't know what brainstorming is, then that's pretty rare. And we probably still use it. I think many people still use it in meetings, and it's the lack of structure is what kills it. And it's gimmicky and clever ideas, and they typically would generate some success in selling something, but it doesn't translate well to a variety of other areas. Novelties and gimmick do have they have value in advertising, and I say in some instances industries have used it to some success, to a little bit of success, but it's just not sufficient and unproductive, and actually you might not get anything out of it. So it tends to be something that people should probably not use. Some problems with creativity that we struggle with is judgment prevents creativity. And think about that for a second. Judgment prevents creativity. Now, why is that? Instant judgment is the enemy of creativity, according to de Bono. It forces us back into our present position. So if we judge, and we typically will judge ideas, and we get stuck in this mindset of how our brain looks at things and how it structures material, and in many ways it's actually a chemical reaction, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. The brain is really not designed to think creatively. It's set up, as I mentioned a second ago, to have a routine pattern of perception and behavior to make sure we do not deviate from these things. And so that's why they say, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. That's, I think, where that expression comes from. Well, it's not that you can't teach them. It's that the dog's just not aware that they need to start thinking a little differently and approaching things differently. Now, judgment is powerful for routine tasks. It's rarely helpful to invent new ideas, or create new ideas, I should say. And we'll take a look at that in just a second. Innocence and ignorance is a pretty relevant theme of the book. And if you actually get the book, he dedicates about a chapter on this topic. And how does innocence help creativity? And feel free to pop in the chat if you have ideas. I'd love to hear what you think. How does innocence create help creativity. And you can also open your mics. So your mics are free to be opened. Go ahead and speak freely if you have any ideas. The fear of ridicule, that is very true. And I actually had some experiences with that early on when I was a student working in the industry, moving into the industry for the first time. We had the high-end designers, the guys that had been doing it for years. You know, they were scary, especially when I was new to it. And I was afraid to say anything, especially since the first time I did, I was just destroyed. And even though it might have been a good idea, you would never know. So yeah, ridicule is a killer. I think a lot of people struggle with that, especially with they're uncertain about you know, what it is that they're saying. You know, they might not be confident. And no preconceived notions, no blockers. That's another benefit to it. Because you're innocent. You don't have all these, and I don't want to say, I'm going to say hang-ups, but that's not the correct term. We're not hung up by things in life that may have beaten us down already. We look at things with fresh eyes. No preconceived notions, that's perfect. Also, less fear of ridicule, that's another one. Sorry. If you aren't innocent, Susan says, if you aren't innocent, you would not rule out some solutions that may seem unsophisticated, and that's very true for sure. Melissa says, not knowing what the old school is up to can create new ideas, but like you said, ridicule can result. Alternatively, great things can come forward. And wouldn't it be great though if you could work in an organization where you would never be ridiculed by anything you ever said, even if it was the most ridiculous thing in the world? I think that's the kind of environment that de Bono would really like to see, and some organizations actually they foster that environment. And I have worked at one environment like that. It was a university in Tempe for years, Arizona, and they actually embraced thinkers and great thinkers, and they held sessions on how to become a better thinker and systems thinking, and you know, a variety of specialists in this area. So you know, when we would gather in the organization to come up with some sort of a new approach to something, even if it was going to affect academics at a high level, you would have anybody from the president to the janitor in these meetings, and the ideas that would flow out of it based on some of the structured techniques that de Bono offers, it was stellar, and it's something that I think a lot of organizations could shoot for. Yeah, absolutely. Let me move on here. Sorry, my PowerPoint is not liking me clicking. There we go. So I think we nailed a lot of it. To a certain extent, children embody the creative impulse because they possess innocence and ignorance. Not knowing the usual approach allows you to more easily come up with a fresh one. And I think we all nailed it on that one. It would be great if we could approach all problems this way, but you know, I think the organization itself has to foster it. I think the Art Institute does well with that. Here's some examples, and I'll read it to you. There's a story of a group of women being shown around a wartime factory. Someone mentioned that there was a problem in the sharpening of carbon rods that were used in searchlights. In her innocence, one woman suggested use a pencil sharpener, and it worked. Simple one. Another one, the Montgolfier brothers flew the first hot air balloon in France. Word reached the king in Paris. The king sent for his chief scientific officer, M. Charles, you might know who that is, whose name is still in use in the law of gaseous expansion with temperature, and demanded a balloon. Ignorant of what the Montgolfier brothers had done, M. Charles proceeded to invent the hydrogen balloon using the newly discovered gas. So it worked, but of course we know where that led in some places. But the idea, again, innocence, approaching a problem is very key. And now here's where we get into some of the problems here. And this is where our brain is actually the problem, believe it or not. The brain is the problem that blocks the creativity and the innocence and the way that we need to look at problems. And believe it or not, if we could master some of de Bono's techniques, I think we'd all be millionaires because we would have developed some form of idea that would have just made us a fortune. But the two types, you have to be aware of this, the two broad types of information systems are the passive and the active. Now the passive system, many of our information systems, including traditional filing cabinets, computer databases, are of the passive type. Now here's the problem with it. In this system, information is recorded on a surface where it remains in a static passive state until there is a need for it. When that need arises, the passive information is accessed and put to use. Versus the active, now this is the self-organizing system. The information and service are both active, and a good metaphor for this process is found in the effect of rain on a natural landscape. And if you can imagine, rain or data, as it falls on the ground or the surface, it naturally collects into streams and rivers or lakes. Now, the more rain that falls, the deeper those streams and rivers and lakes become. The system itself actively organizes the data on its own. Self-organizing, and I think that's where they obviously get that. Now, hold on to those thoughts as we go through some of these additional elements. The human brain is an active self-organizing system. Just as rain wears paths into the earth, our thoughts wear paths, and picture this, into the chemical landscape of our brain. Our most traveled synaptic paths are more easily followed, while less traveled paths weaken or disappear. Now, again, hold on to this thought. While less traveled paths weaken or disappear. Too often, the self-organizing system continues to make use of established patterns, routines, and models, mental models in our brain, while alternate paths go undiscovered. This is what kills creativity. Robert Frost, there you go. The brain's self-organizing chemical system resists creativity. So we can't really help it. It's because we have to function on a daily basis in certain ways, and we repeat a lot of things that we do on a daily basis. And if we didn't, we would have to learn things fresh every day, and that just wouldn't be very productive. But keep in mind, the brain's self-organizing chemical system, it resists creativity, is because these pathways are established already. Whenever we start thinking about some sort of a problem or try to come up with creative ideas, we jump right into those traditional channels. And those channels are what are killing the creativity in our brain. So our brain, in many ways, it's the problem. And here's an example of what that looks like. You take a look at this, how the mind works. We have inputs on the left, and here's these inputs. They're all coming in, and we're focusing on what those inputs are. And I just have three. It's not relevant, but it shows the flow. And then we have our patterns of perception. So we get the focus, we put it in those patterns that we're so used to utilizing of perception, and that's how the mind will function and look at information. Hold that thought as we move on. So the mind, humor, and creativity. We're going to take a slight sidestep here. If I were married to you, I should put poison in your coffee. And if I were married to you, I should drink the coffee. Now, something about jokes is this is the key to lateral thinking. You know, we go down one thought process and we're shocked by the leap. We're shocked by the lateral leap in thinking. And if I were married to you, I should drink the coffee. Well, that's funny. We get humor out of lateral thinking. And this is one of the key elements that if we could teach our brain to jump out of that track, then we would actually be a little better off. So that's going to flash on me. There we go. So here's how it works. In telling a joke, we're taken along a main track. Suddenly, we're shifted to the end of the side track, and immediately we see the track we might have taken. So you can kind of see in this little diagram, here's our typical thinking. And then suddenly, oh no, we take a shift, and this is where the humor is. This is where the mind is working, and we see back to the original joke, and we find humor in it because it's kind of twisted. And I particularly love twisted jokes. But in this case, if you can see the diagram, the brain is doing something very different there. Now, if we could somehow manage to cross over, let me get a little more here. If we could somehow manage to cross over from the main track to the side track, we can then track back to the starting point and get our creative insight or new idea. And his techniques show you how to do that. But you can see in the diagram here, here's the lateral thinking piece. The creative leap and the lateral leap takes us above and down that creative, that loop. And you know, of course, it's almost like a Jedi mind trick. You can't really learn it instantly. You have to train your brain to at least be aware that you're jumping into the common track and you're not thinking creatively because you're struggling getting outside of the normal track and leaping into the side. And this is one of the dilemmas. So let's talk about something that he has developed as a tool to help us along with that. And it's something called PO. And it's a strange thing. Actually, when I first started exploring Edward de Bono some 15 years ago, I thought it was kind of ridiculous to call it PO, but it's short for provocation operation. Now, think about that, provocation, and you'll hear Edward de Bono talk a lot about provocation, and it's the tool that we use to make these leaps. And so a little bit about provocation. It was invented in 1968. We put forward statements not to describe what it is, but to make things happen in our mind. So it's kind of a what if. I think the closest I could compare it to is PO is like what if. What if, suppose, what would happen if? It's a thought experiment. And I have a clip from Edward de Bono here, and I wanted him to explain it to you better than I could. So I'm going to click this clip, and I hope you can hear it.
Provocation is one of the most basic techniques of serious creativity and of lateral thinking. Provocation is used in order to help us to move across the patterns that are formed in our minds in a sense of being the usual way of looking at something. Normally, we only say something if there is a reason for saying that thing. Whatever we say must fit in logically with what has gone before. But in provocation, this is not the case. In provocation, we can say anything, not because it fits in with what we have said before, but because it can provoke new ideas. It can lead us on to new ideas and new ways of looking at something. So if we said, suppose cars have square wheels, that is not a logical statement, does not fit in with our usual engineering concepts of how cars should behave. But it leads us on, it provokes us to move forward. So provocation and movement go together. Movement is what we do with provocations. Movement is a mental operation which allows us to take a provocation and move forward from that provocation to a new idea or a new way of looking at things. So provocation and movement go together. Provocation sets up an unstable situation. Movement is what we use to go forward from that provocation to a new idea.
Hopefully you can hear that. And that gives you an idea of the complexity of it, but it explains, I think, provocation just a little bit deeper than I could. And you heard it from de Bono himself. And so here's an example of what that might look like. PO, and this is how he would put it in a meeting, or if say you're getting together and you're trying to generate ideas, he'd pose a provocation. PO, the factory is downstream of itself. Well, the word PO is intended to be a provocation and not a serious suggestion. So he's suggesting something radical just to start generating ideas. Or PO, planes should land upside down. That seems crazy, but it starts to generate ideas. And again, it's a free thinking session. It's a group of activities where people are, again, no ridicule. There's no bad ideas. And so those are the kinds of provocations. Now, some of the development that has come from those, and hold on a second there, I'm getting a flicker. Some of the most interesting things that can be discovered by using a provocation and posing some radical idea. And another example, and here's one that came up, how do you help people quit smoking was one that his book talks about, and I thought it was interesting. And one of the things that they developed was, what if we put a line on the cigarette and the smoker actually, when they were to reach the line, they would stop smoking. And they generated, they show in the book how they generated some crazy ideas that led to that particular solution. I think it's a good idea. I don't think a smoker these days wants to throw away half a cigarette, though. That's the problem, because they're like $50,000 a cigarette. I'm not a smoker myself, but I think it's a radical idea. And so using those techniques can generate some interesting stuff. So PO in the mind, validity of the results can never be justified by how we go there. Think about that for a sec. Validity of the results can never be justified by how we go there. And hindsight shows the real value. It may show the real value. And hindsight's 20/20. I think that's another expression that rings true. But you can see the provocation lives somewhere between the main track of thinking and the creative leap that brings us back around. The provocation, this particular spot, is the doorway back to the creative leap. And the tool lives in that particular spot. So he talked about movement, and if you don't have any movement, and movement is really, I think, just the generation of ideas that move whatever the problem scenario is forward. Without movement, you don't really have anything, and that's the challenge. It's the opposite of judgment when presented an unworkable idea, and learn from it and move on. Must have a general willingness to move plus these techniques. And so here's some ideas that he talks about in his book, and these require like a little bit more in depth, but I'm going to give you some tools for these. Extract a principle, which is something usable from the ideas. Focus on the difference and explore. Have moment to moment, visualize what ifs and positive aspects, what is valuable, what isn't. Circumstances, when is there a direct value? And so you still have to use a little bit of judgment while using movement, because some of the ideas you'll generate using provocation might just be radically unusable. So keep that in mind. And some lateral thinking tools, and again, I jump right into these because we start to get into the weeds a little bit with some of the ideas, but the essence of it is, well, how do we make ourselves force ourselves to get out of that main thinking track, because our brain does that automatically? How do we get out of that? And I need a tool. I need a concrete tool, and brainstorming is just not it. So one of them is 6 thinking hats. And I'm not sure if you've ever used 6 thinking hats, and I'd love to hear if you have. Post in the chat or the questions. If you've ever used 6 thinking hats, you don't actually have to wear a hat, but some organizations, they do. I think it's a little corny. I feel funny wearing a colored hat just to demonstrate what hat we are on. But what you do in a group like this, you have, say, 5 to 10 people, whatever it is, and you have an idea of, or a problem that you want to come up with, and you might be using provocation for it. But how do you focus your thinking on the ideas that are specific to what you need? Well, here it is. You have the white hat, you have the red, the black, the yellow, the green, and the blue, and you can't really see the blue there, I apologize. And what you do is you change from one hat to the other, and you go around the room and let people just express their ideas, but they wear this hat as they do it. So I don't know if you've ever been in a meeting and they said, well, I'm going to yellow hat this story or this problem, or I'm going to green hat this story, this problem. I'm saying story, I don't know why. You'll actually get ideas from it. So a white hat, you might start there. The analysis according to the facts. All right, this is where you get the PhDs and the folks that really like to lean on, when I say PhDs, most of us like to lean on facts, and most of us like to analyze those facts and make a decision based on those facts. But sometimes you don't generate a lot of ideas that way. It's almost black and white. But then you might have a red hat. You'll switch. All right, now we're going to red hat this idea. And that's where people will be emotional about it or use intuition. And of course, there's somebody documenting this as you go. I think the red hat a lot of times is left out of analysis. So you can see the white and red, they kind of complement each other, because without it, the intuition piece, I think many people have great intuition and experience in people that have been in an industry for a very long time. They have intuition, and it's usually really good, and it could be left out of a decision-making process if you weren't to use this process. The black hat is the judgment and caution. I call these guys the negative people, but they're not. I mean, again, you need to have the black hat because you have to use caution, especially if there is high dollars at stake or something at risk. And then those ideas are documented, and then you have the yellow hat, which is successes and benefits. What are the successes for this potentially? What are the benefits potentially? The positivists. And then the green hat, of course, which is the creativity and the provocation. These are the ones where we're just being a little out there and trying to create something that's maybe outside of the box, reaching for things. And again, no bad ideas here. So this is where you, again, document those. And then you have the blue hat. Now, the blue hat is the guy who basically says, all right, enough of this one. Let's move on to green hat, or we need to change this to the black hat. They kind of watch the group and they see which direction it's going to go. And they basically have the process control. So they'll continue to, restate the problem if necessary. They might even recap where they are. But the blue hat is the guy or the girl that is in control of the process. So that's one technique that many people use, and it seems simple, and it is. And it really does create a structured thinking session that allows you to generate a variety of ideas. And I've used it for years in groups, and I think it works well. And here's where the cigarette technique came about. Another one, and this one takes a little prep, is you begin by collecting random words from the dictionary and writing them on a slip of paper. And then in a brainstorming session, simply choose a piece of paper from the pile and see what idea the word triggers in relationship to the subject. And, this one requires you to cut out little pieces of paper and put them in a hat. If you actually look online, too, they already have these done. They have the random input process where they have sheets of just different words. You just have to print them and cut them out. But the subject was a cigarette, and the random word was traffic light. So you see here, the random word, of course, was a strange one, traffic light. From that quickly came the suggestion of putting a red band around cigarettes so that the smoker had a decision zone. If he or she stopped at the red band, then the smoker was gaining control over his or her smoking habit. And I can't imagine what some of the words would be, like dog fur, cigarette and dog fur. Well, you could think of some crazy ideas for that one. Put dog fur in the last part of the cigarette, and people would stop smoking immediately. But again, the random idea, random input is one of those ones that might take a little bit of time to generate ideas with. And again, it just depends on the problem. So moving on, the creative pause is another one, and many of us probably already do this, is the willingness to pause and wonder from time to time. And, we have to be in a session that's free of ridicule and has the opportunity to give us the moment to do this. We also have to be with a group of people that realize that, this is a session where we're trying to generate ideas. And so we have to have the latitude to take a moment. And this is the willingness to interrupt the smooth flow of an operation or a line of thinking to ask questions. Is there an alternative? And these are just a few questions. Do we have to do it this way? What can we do with this? And I think many of us do this, depending on who you work with. The pause happens when you're thinking about something or reading something, or when you are listening to someone talk, and then you take a moment and you reflect on it, and you pause and wonder, what if? If you do that now, then you probably are using your time much more effectively. But the creative pause, I'm curious, anybody ever heard of the creative pause? Pop in the questions or the chat if you have. I'm curious. Something we should all do. Moving on, some benefits of the effects of serious creativity. An institution may benefit from a shift in attitudes toward creativity. So using these techniques, again, it's key because an institution has to embrace it. This is a useful element if they're consistently or needing to regularly reevaluate processes or services or some sort of a system within an organization. Another one, an emphasis on lateral thinking techniques may result in new approaches or solutions to old problems, which is very useful. Creative thinking is different from normal thinking, and I think we've gathered that. A shift towards acceptance of creative thinking also allows participants to accept the notion that there are even more modes of thought. And yeah, this is a very powerful statement, and that's why I highlighted it. If you're with a group of people that realize that there is something called lateral thinking, then it really allows people to embrace the idea that maybe we're not thinking as deeply or as effectively about something that we could. And so more investigation could be useful. There are hundreds of techniques that de Bono has, and I'm just kind of giving you a few. This will allow people to also overcome confrontational approaches to problems. I think backing up to the 6 thinking hats, if you've ever been at a session where people are having a conversation about ideas, well, what do we do about this problem? Well, you're going to have the analysts on one side, you're going to have the creative folks on the other side, you're going to have the intuition flowing. And what happens in a meeting like that? Well, you start to get ruffled feathers. And then this is very common. And as soon as people start ruffling their feathers, it starts to hinder the ideas. People aren't speaking up or saying things that could very well be the breakthrough that they need. And so the 6 thinking hats is one of the key tools that says, look, we're not being analysts right now. We're being creative, or we're being cautious, or we're thinking outside the box. And it completely prevents people from getting upset, completely. And so this is ultimately the goal of some of those techniques. And I think it really creates a more productive session. So that was kind of a general overview of it. And I know we're a little short on the 30 minutes. I kind of flew through the material today. This particular book is something I highly recommend you going out and getting. The book, again, is called Serious Creativity, Using the Power of Lateral Thinking to Create New Ideas, of course, by Edward de Bono. And he has a couple of books out. Well, he has many books out. I can tell you that this book is very good. He also has a book out called Creating Innovative Teams, which is also a great one. And Creating Innovative Teams is one where it's basically just like a handbook of techniques for teaching your staff or your coworkers how to be more innovative. And it's really through lateral thinking. And I think lateral thinking leads to innovation quite a bit. It's fostering the activities that lead there, which is key. All right, and if you have questions, go ahead and pop those in. Let's see here. We have a attached form I have downloaded. Doesn't appear to be related to your presentation. Okay, well, you'll get an email on that. They send me an email with that link, and that's the one they gave me, but they may have regurgitated it from my previous session. So just stand by for the email. My email address is merwin@aii.edu, and let me bring this up here. If you want to shoot me an email if you don't get that for some reason, but they do send out an email for all the attendants through this, and then that gives you that link that you can take. And it's going to be just a simple, 6-question thing that just asks you what we talked about, and I think you'll gather what we did. And the title of the book, again, is Serious Creativity, Using the Power of Lateral Thinking to Create New Ideas. And it's just really big letters. It says Serious Creativity. And it's about, 300 pages. The very back part of the book has an appendix in it that has just a tremendous amount of activities that you can do. It also has a training session on how to train your team to utilize these techniques. It also has alternate ideas. It has some methods for evaluating how you're doing it. I mentioned the random word technique, which is one, the 6 thinking hats. There's a variety of other ones too. Check it out. I think you can probably get it on Amazon these days, relatively inexpensive. It's been out for a while. Another good one, as I mentioned, is building innovative teams. I think that's a good one too. You keep an eye out for that one. I think Edward de Bono himself, there's some websites that have some techniques, like literally tools. If you do a search on lateral thinking techniques, you will find just a tremendous amount of activities. And again, this is one of those things you got to do push-ups with it. You can't just walk up to it and go, I'm a lateral thinker. You really have to practice some of the techniques. But even the simplest techniques used in a group are going to make your, and I hate to say brainstorming, but those brainstorming sessions more productive, more structured. People are going to be less likely to hold back, and you won't upset anyone, which is great too. And it is true, Susan. Susan mentioned it's relevant for those lone artist thinker or small groups as in small teams, which is great. And I think many groups work in smaller, or teams work in smaller groups. And if you can use these techniques and everybody embraces it, I think it works well. Question from Joan. What happens in groups which contain people from different cultures? I remember that a friend worked for a Japanese entity. His thinking time was seen as wasting time. Whoa. Well, that statement says it all, really. I mean, his thinking time was seen as wasting time. I think those guys probably could use a big lateral thinking hug. Maybe De Bono should fly out there and hug him himself. But, you know, I don't think any time is wasted when you're working in a group and trying to create an activity, obviously, that's more productive than just saying, you know, it sounds like he was probably a dictatorial type leader, like, you're going to do this and we're not thinking. Electrical engineer, yeah, of course. Engineers definitely think a little differently than most people. And actually, I think that if you put an engineer in a lateral thinking session utilizing De Bono's techniques, their skin begins to burn off. I'm not sure. I'm just kidding, of course, but yeah, that's definitely a different group. Excellent. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. And if you don't have any further questions, then I will let you all have a wonderful evening. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. Again, my email address is merwin, M-E-R-W-I-N, @aii.edu. And I'm glad to chat with you more about this topic anytime. I'm going to be offering a series of sessions like these where we're talking about thinking and creating more effective processes for thinking. So look for some future sessions on various topics. On things like systems thinking, a little bit more on innovation, and hopefully these will be a little bit more interesting than some of the things we've been doing. If you have ideas for things that are relevant to creating great minds, shoot me an email too. I'd love to get a session on there about those. And have a wonderful evening, everyone.